Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by Christopher Carter for segment 2 of the North Shore Drive podcast here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about Patrick Queen, Payton Wilson, the inconsistency at linebacker from both of them, really. Early in the season, we saw struggles from Payton Wilson. He had a great game this past week against the Packers. Patrick Queen, somewhat on the other end of that spectrum, had some really good games there in the middle of the season, to this point at least, and then the last couple of games, there's been some signs of struggle. So we're going to talk through all of that with Chris. Before we do, we want to thank a couple of sponsors. Savinas, Kane & Gallucci, Pittsburgh's mesothelioma and asbestos attorneys, standing up for victims of mesothelioma and asbestos cancers with over 85 years of experience. Visit them at sdklaw.com for a consultation. Also want to thank Olivia Numismatic Rarities. Have you got old jewelry and gold collecting dust? Turn it into instant cash safely and securely at Olivia Numismatic Rarities right here in Pittsburgh's Shady Side neighborhood. Gold prices are at historic highs, and ONR pays top dollar for your unwanted gold and silver coins. Stop by their Shady Side gallery at 5833 Ellsworth Avenue or visit onrcoins.com to learn more. That's onrcoins.com or call 412-900-COIN today. All right, Chris, let's talk about Patrick Queen. Past two games, Pro Football Focus at least has faulted him with 7 missed tackles. Has held him responsible for 144 yards in coverage that he has allowed across those two contests. You had him as one of your lowest graded players in your grades post on postgazette.com against the Packers. Only a couple weeks ago, he was getting a lot of praise for that defensive resurgence we saw against the Vikings. In particular, had a great game, seemed to be finding ball carriers with ease. What's happened with him? And what's your assessment of the player to date so far this season?
I think that Patrick Queen has been caught up in a lot of the problems that the Steelers have been experiencing on defense when it comes to trying to piece things together in the middle of it. I think that he's been one of the players who I think has tried to help others a bit more, and in doing so has lost his assignments at times. I think sometimes he's just been straight up beat. But I think Patrick Queen still has a lot of potential to be very good for the Steelers. He's despite his experience in the NFL, he is a younger player with he's I think he's still in his mid to late 20s. He's not even I don't think he's even 29 yet. And so he has plenty of time to still be really good for the Steelers, and he has been good. I think he's been very up and down. But I think it's just disappointing because you were hoping that he'd be a more consistent force for the Steelers. And he hasn't been, and I still think he can get there, but I think that sometimes Patrick Queen can be part of the rising tide, if you will, with the Steelers. I think when things are going bad, it's going bad for him really too, because he's the one that's kind of relaying everything and trying to keep everything together. But when things are structurally sound around him, he becomes such a force because then he can play within the structure that much better. I don't think he's a game breaker by himself, but I think he's kind of like that guy that hey, if the D line is doing their jobs, not even crushing people, just doing their jobs, keeping him clean, and the corners aren't letting guys just run free at the one or 2 seconds after the snap, he's going to do his job well enough that he's going to fill his role pretty well, and he'll get after the quarterback, he'll stuff the run, he'll make plays in the pass game. And I think that he can be really good at that. And so that's why it's kind of disappointing to see the flip turn he's had. Like you said, 2 weeks ago against the Browns, he looked great. He looked awesome. He was making it happen against the Vikings. He was so sharp in Dublin. And I thought he was really putting it together. And I think that's another thing. It's just really disappointing about this Bengals loss and then the Packers losses is that he's looked completely the opposite of what he was trending towards. So I think he can turn it around, but that's certainly a problem. But I certainly think you've seen other turns for, in the opposite direction. Payton Wilson was having a real rough time. I thought he was having a real rough go for a bit there for the Steelers, and that's why Cole Holcomb started to get more snaps. But in this game in particular, the Packers game, I thought he was actually pretty good. He was getting pressure on the quarterback. And I think the Steelers need to kind of go back to something that they thought that he'd be able to do early in the season. That's cover. I know that he got burned a couple times early in the season, but in coverage, if he's not breaking it up, he's tackling you as soon as you catch it. He's big, he's fast, he can change directions. I think they shouldn't try to overcomplicate his role too much. But when the Steelers go up against Tyler Warren type of tight end, instead of trying to put Chuck Clark on him, put Peyton Wilson on him and put him like mano-a-mano. I'm up front. Peyton Wilson may not cover him for 7 seconds and completely take him away, but he's going to give him a hard time at the line of scrimmage. He's going to run with him, and it's going to at least make it so that if like a Daniel Jones at quarterback will have to hold the ball for 4 or 5 seconds if he wants to get the ball off to Tyler Warren. So, it's disappointing, but I don't think it's unfixable for Patrick Queen.
Yeah, Patrick Queen, you mentioned his age. He is 26. So in a lot of ways, he's still pretty young.
Sheesh.
But in another, I think, very real way for fans in particular, he's not young in the sense that he is on a lucrative second contract. So where, in your eyes, do the expectations balance out between those two factors? Youth, maybe still some upside to mine there, maybe still some potential, but also he's being paid to not be that. To not have to figure things out, to be the guy that is figuring it out, to be the difference maker. How do you balance those two things when you evaluate them?
I mean, I think the thing is that sometimes guys are paid what they're paid, but like they're not. Sometimes they are paid with the expectation that like, hey, we may think that you're good right now, but we think you're going to be even better later. And like, I could see Patrick Queen being the guy that if the D-line, if Derek Harmon works out, if they can figure out some of these things in coverage, I think he can be a premier linebacker for this team that makes a lot of plays, again, within the structure. I just think that he's also a guy that needs to be part of a structure that's good. There were times when, Lawrence Timmons didn't look as strong as he could have, if the defense wasn't all together. But when it was, he was flying all over the place, making plays, and he was dangerous. He was a law dog. He was a bad man. And I think similarly, think about it's kind of a similar as far as their value sometimes to some people in the position. But running back, you can have a really good running back stuck behind a bad offensive line and a team that doesn't have a real passing threat, and it's kind of just like wasted. And I think that's been the problem right now, is that the Steelers have been kind of wasting the potential of Patrick Queen. And sometimes he makes mistakes himself, but I think that the problems they had with D-line early in the season and stopping the run, like guys like Keanu Benton were getting beat up front too much. But with the return of Derek Harmon, I think that's been a lot less of an issue. But I think another thing that's happening right now is the guys in the secondary have to be sharper. They have to be smarter. They have to be better at taking away the primary reads from opposing teams. And I don't think that they've done a good job at that.
Chris, we're going to talk about Peyton Wilson in a second. Just want to let you all know that the Steelers are currently minus 150 to miss the playoffs right now, according to our friends at FanDuel. If you like their playoff odds, if you don't like their playoff odds, make sure you check them out over at FanDuel as the Steelers get through this 2-game losing streak. Does it get longer, or can they snap it this week against the Colts? Check that out all over there. You talked a little bit about Peyton Wilson earlier, Chris. To what extent do you think he's figuring it out and maybe raising that, floor a little bit in terms of his performance? I think coverage was the big problem for him early in the season. You would look at how many times he was getting targeted, and it would be ugly. Mm-hmm. And then now you've faced these teams that have basically been tearing everyone else up other than him. Is that a sign maybe that he is really starting to figure things out in that regard and live up to? Because I remember we did a video with him at training camp saying he wants to be the best coverage linebacker in the NFL. Still seems like we're a ways to go, to there. But, I don't think he needs to be the best coverage linebacker in the NFL to be an asset to this defense, especially right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talk about Patrick Queen being 26, Peyton Wilson's like 25. So these are two young guys, Patrick Queen with a lot more experience, but these are two guys that are still figuring out who they are right now. I think it's important to remember that, Troy Polamalu was not Troy Polamalu right away. The guys take time to grow into their roles, grow into the defense, and figure out just how good they can actually be. And I think Peyton Wilson is figuring that out. But I do think that there's a lot of upside with this guy. I loved his tape at NC State when he was in college. I think the biggest thing that you were worried about was, could he be healthy? Could he withstand NFL seasons? There was a lot of questions about his knees. I had someone who covered him at NC State talking to me, and a reporter being like, from what I've heard, people think that he's going to be done after 3 years in the NFL. Well, 1.5 years in, he's looking pretty good, and he's not looking like he's wearing down at all. So I think Peyton Wilson is on a good trajectory. I think that they need to use him more. I understand why they haven't. I think he's had some bad games, and I've graded him as such. But this comes with the ebbs and flow of growth in players. I think another example that you could point to for Steelers fans who want to think back and have rose-colored glasses, or I guess gold-colored glasses on nostalgia and things in the past. Ike Taylor went from being a really good rookie and second-year cornerback who was an important part of the Super Bowl 40 team to getting benched eventually, and not being the guy in 2006 because he wasn't doing his job well. And then eventually he kind of figured it out under Mike Tomlin. They became one of the better cover corners in the NFL. It takes time for guys to grow and develop and learn. And on that process, there'll be mistakes. And even once they get to that point, there'll be mistakes, but I think Peyton Wilson is on a really good track to figure that out.
Where does Cole Holcomb fit into this conversation for you with these middle linebackers and the inconsistency? Played 21 snaps by my math here against Green Bay. Has generally been solid when he's been in there, but I think he's a bit more situational in terms of his potential usage than these two guys. That's why they start, a good chunk of the time. But there's a lot of preseason conversation about Cole Holcomb coming back and what he could bring to this middle linebacker group. So knowing what you know about those first two guys, what role do you see for him the rest of the way?
I mean, Cole Holcomb, unfortunately at this stage, I think is primarily just a run defender. I mean, I think early on the plan was to just have it be Wilson and Queen, and then he would come in on heavy downs, and Holcomb could come in and help clean up, when teams are trying to run the ball. Then they try to give him some more snaps when Peyton Wilson started to, have some mistakes here and there. But then you saw in this game against the Packers, he was biting on play action hard, leaving zones wide open, just not unable to play there that way. And listen, part of it might be that injury that, took him out for a season, and he's had to figure out who he is. He certainly has worked through it physically, but sometimes you can be the most in shape person and recovered after an injury, but the mental parts of the game still don't, get still might not get you to be a super, the player that you think you can be. So I look at Cole Holcomb, and I think that right now he's definitely the third linebacker on this team. Bring him in on rundowns, bring him in to support when Queen or Wilson need breaths. But I think he's the clear number 3.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much for your time this week. If you're just joining us for the first time, please consider subscribing to our channel. We got a lot more coming at you this week. Chris will be back later in the week with Brian back on the North Shore Drive. I will have Paul Zeitz on Thursday. And, of course, we'll have the Steelers postgame show after Steelers-Colts on Sunday on the channel. So make sure you subscribe for all that. Please make sure you like this video. If you enjoyed it, help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And please consider subscribing at post-gazette.com. Really helps us out if you join us over there. So thanks for the audience this week, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.